I'd like to just tell you a little bit about the program here, our energy program here. So as Mark said, I direct our Institute for Energy and the Environment. And as part of our Institute for Energy and the Environment, we do a number of things. One is we have a bunch of graduate degree programs. We offer a master's in energy regulation and law, a JD where you can get a concentration in energy law or a joint degree with a master's degree. And we have an LLM in energy law for those that already have a JD. So we also offer all of our master's and LLM degrees fully online also. In addition to that, the program, I want to just mention our summer program very quickly since I have you all here. In the summer, we have a really fabulous, and some of you may know this, environmental and energy program, and you can take classes ranging from 1 to 3 weeks or on Fridays, 8 weeks across the summer. And on the highlights of some of the things we have coming up this summer, we have a great one-week class on clean transportation policy, where Joe Halso, who's an advocate for the Sierra Club, is going to come and teach that. We have a great one-week class on clean energy advocacy that Kit Kennedy from NRDC is going to teach. And we have a wonderful 8-week class across the summer where Elizabeth and Emily, 2 staff members from Vermont Energy Investment Corp, are going to come and teach our energy efficiency class this week. And those are all open to people that are either degree seeking or coming and just taking a class. I also would like to take a second to recognize someone here who's been very important to our energy program, and that's Professor Michael Dworkin, who founded our energy program. So let's just give Michael a hand, and Michael can stand up. And given Michael's long-standing relationship with our keynote speaker, it's appropriate to recognize him too. So, really, Rich Cowart doesn't need an introduction to anyone that has focused on energy policy, particularly electric policy, whether it's Vermont, the nation, Europe, or the world. But in case I'm new to this, or maybe you haven't been paying attention closely, I'll just take a couple minutes and tell you a little bit about Rich. So Rich Cowart is a principal with RAP, and until last year, he was the director of RAP's Europe program. He joined RAP in 1999 after 13 years at the Vermont Public Service Board, now the PUC. And for 12 of those years, he was the chair. Before that, he was an assistant professor and director of the program in planning and law at the University of California, Berkeley. And before that, he was executive director and general counsel of the Vermont Environmental Board. And I'd be remiss not to mention that he also did a tour of duty here as the director of our Environmental Law Center, and he has his picture hanging up on the wall in our conference room in the building next door. Rich's influence in energy and environmental policy in Vermont, New England, US, the world is extensive and profound. And we could talk at length about that, but I just want to highlight 2 of his achievements that he's focused on. One of Rich's lifelong passion has been energy efficiency and integrated planning. When he was chair of the Vermont Public Service Board, and through his work with NARUC, the idea of energy efficiency utility really is something that Rich created, and the implementation and development of Efficiency Vermont, which was later followed through on by Professor Dworkin, another former chair of the Public Service Board, was really because of Rich's leadership. He also has worked extensively with the northeastern states in the design of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is also one of those other things here in the Northeast we like to take credit for. So without going into further detail, I'll just turn it over to Rich, and I'm sure we're going to have a very enjoyable keynote address. Thanks, Rick.
Just to give you comfort, I'm starting a timer, and when it makes a noise, I have 1 minute. All right. Let me just start by saying that I feel a little funny being named the keynote speaker here, because in this audience of experts, there's a dozen people who could be standing here. And I also think that Dave Farnsworth deserves credit for actually keynoting this conference and setting it up in the first place. Let's see which way I go here. Okay. I'm violating a rule by having more than 3 major points, but 2 of them are going to be quick. First, I'm going to talk about time, efficiency first, carbon prices versus carbon policies, why Vermont's leadership is important, and then some questions to tee up the conversation in the afternoon around a theme which I'll call carbon efficiency, to make a special point about really, as Dave teed it up this morning and some of the other speakers have already said, it's not beneficial if it's not efficient, and if it's not reducing carbon, it's not going to be beneficial. Now, I've been to a lot of these conferences, global warming conferences, et cetera, et cetera. Y'all probably have been to a bunch of them. And I realized that the usual first slide is showing something melting. It's a glacier, it's the North Pole, it's something melting. I am here today to tell you that I am past melting. I have a new image. It's more urgent than that. People look at melting glaciers and they think they have time to do something about it. That is absolutely no longer the case. This is one of 5 million gazillion pictures of the California fires this summer. It's a metaphor. Yes, it's probably climate related, but it's also what we're facing in the real world. Why am I feeling this sense of urgency? There's a whole bunch of different ways to talk about this, but just a personal story. I recently was at a week-long meeting of climate activists from all across the world, people who are dedicating themselves to solving climate problems in the Philippines and Indonesia and Turkey and South Africa and a dozen other places. And as part of the sort of icebreaker for this conference, the organizers asked us, we were in a big room, bigger than this, and they asked us to line up according to the time zones of what we call home. And so we all had a good time organizing ourselves according to time zones. And then they said, well, now I want you to organize yourselves according to how long you've been working on clean energy. So we all organized ourselves into that. People who just started and people who've been doing it a long time. Probably in this room, there's people who've been doing it a long time. Well, I was at the far end of the room. And I realized that it was a realization that I have been working on this topic, along with some of you, for 40 years. So why does that give me a sense of urgency? This chart shows the total contributions of carbon emissions since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, cumulatively. Now, when I read about this stuff and I say, oh yeah, it goes back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So I think it's been building for a really long time, and therefore probably, we deserve to take a really long time to do something about it. That bar on that graph is the year I was born. 85% of the total global contribution to greenhouse gases, 85% has occurred in my lifetime. That's a shocking thing to realize. Now, this chart on the right-hand side shows you a very typical chart of what we have to do to get down to 80%, or to get down to 20% of 1990 emissions by 2050, right? You've seen a million of these charts. They all have a steep slope going not up, but down. And ask yourself, how much time do we have between now and 2050 to reverse this and make it look like that? I am feeling a strong sense of urgency and the realization that basically it's one career lifetime of an energy professional to accomplish what we need to accomplish by 2050. All right, thanks for listening. Now, I hope that we can end up on a positive message and not just a message of urgency, but I'm going to take you quickly through some of the places where I see the mission in front of us and some hope along the way. I love this quote from Stephen Chu when he was Secretary of Energy. I won't comment on the comparisons to the current Secretary of Energy, but energy efficiency needs to come first. I'm going back, think of that slide of the California fires. People fighting those fires needed to seek containment by coming at it from all sides. All sides. I've been hearing a lot of talk in Europe and in the US recently about, well, renewables are getting so cheap, who cares about efficiency? You heard this morning from the speakers that renewables are not too cheap to meter, and that we have to pursue the efficiency containment side at the same time we push on renewables, at the same time we push on electrification, at the same time we talk about rate design and better market policies. We need to squeeze this problem from all sides, and efficiency is still first. We have good news here in Vermont. We have, in fact, succeeded in developing and advancing the idea of efficiency first. In our laws, in our practices, we've set a very good example for others to follow. Efficiency in Vermont, this is the quiet, sleeping thing that happens with efficiency. Efficiency now provides 20% in total of the electrical demand of the state. Efficiency Vermont will tell you it's 16 point something due to Efficiency Vermont's programs, but I added 4% to deal with the programs that came before Efficiency Vermont and on the side of Efficiency Vermont. It's legitimate to estimate that it's one of the largest power sources serving energy needs in the state of Vermont, slowly growing over the years, and it continues to grow and provide benefits. It's generated at least $2.5 billion in electricity savings to Vermont customers. We've avoided carbon emissions at less than zero cost. When we confront the problem of the energy transformation and we care what carbon reduction costs, we're going to have to keep in mind the fact that energy efficiency paves the way by making those low-cost savings available. Unfortunately, the next steps are going to be harder. You've heard from the speakers this morning, Vermont, because of its unique characteristics, is different than the rest of the US. 76% of emissions in Vermont, 67% in emissions in Vermont are coming from transportation and heat. And transportation and heat are not as easy to deal with as electricity. I have to say, I used to think it was really hard to, take on the task of transforming the electric sector, And it has been hard, it's still hard. But compared to transforming this existing stock of buildings, not just in Vermont, but anywhere, electricity is kind of easy. We've sort of started off with some of the easy bits. Now, what do we have to work with? Now, there's good news here, and it was mentioned this morning as well. I hear all the time, we can't afford it. We can't afford to decarbonize, just too expensive. And as was pointed out this morning, compared to what? That's, by the way, a very good rap phrase, which I'll encourage you to think about. Pretty much anytime anybody tells you what something costs, ask, compared to what? Well, in the case of Vermont, we spend about $2 billion a year to import gas, diesel, and fuel oil. In other words, to import carbon that we don't actually want to burn. I just wanted to figure out how big is $2 billion? How does that compare to something that we can think about realistically? Well, it turns out that it's twice as big and close to 3 times as big some years as the entire agricultural economy of the state of Vermont. It's also equal to the entire income of 35,000 average Vermont households. So you can envision 35,000 households working full-time, taking home no pay in order to pay for the fossil fuels that Vermont imports. Or 133,000 average income tax filers in the state of Vermont. So that's a revenue stream. That is a flow of money that can be redirected towards the ends that we would like to achieve. Now, I'm going to take on one of my main topics, which I'll call the logic of carbon revenue recycling. We've heard about it a bit this morning, and so I can go through it fairly quickly. How many people have seen one of these cost curves, the McKinsey carbon abatement cost curves? Okay, a lot of you have seen it. The point of putting this up here now is to show you that if you study how much it costs to reduce a ton of carbon, and you can quibble about all the details of this chart, but on the left-hand side, there are lots of things that we can do as a society to reduce carbon emissions that that save money. So the carbon savings are essentially free if we can go out and capture the measures that are on the left-hand side of this chart. And yet, they're not being done. That's why they're still there on the left-hand side of the chart. This is evidence that the market barriers to energy efficiency are pervasive enough, powerful enough, and embedded enough that carbon pricing, which would just make them more cost-effective, is unlikely to move the needle very far. And that's the experience that we have when we look at what does carbon pricing do to change behavior in these embedded end uses like transportation and buildings. The good news is that we know from experience that having a small carbon price or some other source of revenue equivalent to a low carbon price and investing that revenue in a well-designed efficiency program can save 9 times more carbon for the same amount of consumer payment as a carbon price alone would have achieved. People are shocked to hear this. People say, well, just make fossil fuels more expensive, people will save, it'll be great. And we know from long experience that you can make fossil fuels more expensive, people will just complain, and behavior doesn't change very much, and you don't save much carbon. But this chart is based upon evidence from the United Kingdom, but we've done the same analysis in other places. It's either 9 times better or 7 times better to take the revenue and invest it directly in a program that helps consumers save. Now, we have experience, fortunately, right in our backyard that demonstrates the value of carbon revenue recycling, and that's RGGI. It's worth noting that Vermont was the first jurisdiction, I think, based on my research, first jurisdiction in the world to dedicate all of its carbon revenue to end-use energy efficiency. And that idea started in Vermont, taken up quickly by a lot of allies around New England, and there across RGGI, has led to a situation in RGGI where, as you can see here, over 60% of the carbon revenues generated by RGGI have been dedicated to efficiency. We've reduced carbon emissions in the region by 40%, exceeding our goals, by the way, and saving consumers multiple billions of dollars in their bills. I work in Europe. You heard me say a minute ago that we work in Europe. The Europeans absolutely are befuddled by this. They have grown up with the belief that you need to, in essence, I was going to use the word punish, but I'll stimulate end-use behavior changes through high prices. And the idea in Europe with the emissions trading system they have has been for many years dominated by the idea that all we have to do is make the price higher. That's our goal, make the price higher. And we came over with the experience of RGGI and started saying, well, you know, you really don't need to do that. Actually, you could have a lower price, and if you use the money wisely, you could actually achieve your goals, and it would be politically sustainable. And the European countries now are actually moving to where now about 25% of the carbon revenue in Europe is being invested in efficiency. And many of us are trying to get that up to a RGGI-like figure of 60. Okay, that's one example where leadership in a small place like Vermont can, in this case, influence a region, and that region can then influence other regions around the world. Vermont leadership really does matter. And that point was made this morning, and I really want to emphasize it. I'm going to give you one more example, other than RGGI. In Vermont, as you know, we created something called an energy efficiency obligation. Our utilities were required to help their customers save energy. That's the obligation. We were invited to provide evidence to the European Parliament on this question a few years ago. And the evidence from North America, not just Vermont, but other countries, other states in the US, was persuasive enough that the European, this is going to work out, where the European Parliament enacted something called the Energy Efficiency Directive, which requires member states in the European Union to create energy efficiency obligations for their utilities, or to do something equivalent. Since that time, we now have seen the expansion of countries in Europe adopting energy efficiency obligations. From 5 to 16, the last time this slide was prepared, and then last night I added Sweden, Bosnia, and Greece because we've been invited to go to those 3 countries to pass on the lessons learned here in Vermont, along with other states in the United States. I'm going to close with my carbon efficiency questions. So I told you a minute ago that one of the things to take away from this talk is, remember to ask yourself, compared to what? With respect to carbon and the idea of being efficient about the way we reduce carbon, I would also ask these 4 questions. How many tons will it save? How fast will it save them? How much will it cost consumers per ton of carbon avoided? And is it fair? How does it promote energy justice? We need to answer all 4 of those questions as we design the policies that we know we need in order for us to efficiently act. My last slide is because I'm coming back to the beginning. We really do need to act. And the good news is we've learned a lot about how to do it. Thank you. Okay, there's nobody standing here next to me, so I get to say, are there any questions? I know we have a couple minutes.
I'm Carl Brandon from Vermont Tech, and you were talking about doing efficiency as well as other things, and I literally had 10 people working in my house the same week, half of them putting in upgrading my insulation, half of them putting heat pumps in 3 years ago, and I've been totally running on heat pumps for that time. They work at 40 below zero. I go in with infrared thermometers, and no backup has been used in that 3 years.
Good for you.
I'm also totally photovoltaic for my house and my car.
So you're an emblem of the future in that sense.
So RGGI has been held up as a success story, but in fact, as a contrarian, I would say a large part of their, should we say, improvements in carbon reduction really came from the transition to natural gas that occurred in Iceland, New England. And that tempers my enthusiasm for carbon trading systems, unless they can do something a little bit differently. From your perception, are prices of carbon trading systems a little too politicized now, or do they need, how would you improve them?
Are you just speaking of RGGI in particular, or of?
Well, RGGI is only one of the more obvious ones. TCI is another is about to start up. You have WCI is still another.
I think it's a really great question. So I'm gonna start with your first statement, which is that we have in this region, in first-line terms, benefited significantly by the fact that cheap natural gas is available, has become available to help us reduce emissions. There's no, question that that's the case. I would actually put back to the audience the following challenge, which we've been pursuing in some of our international venues, which is how can we decarbonize away from coal without locking in reliance on natural gas? Because if you go back to those 80% reduction curves, we can't just replace coal with gas and think we've done something good. We actually have to design policies now that are intended to take us to leapfrog gas to end uses that are even cleaner. So just think about that challenge as the United States and everybody else tries to go to do that. The problem with carbon pricing is that it tends, when it works, to jump you from coal to gas. And to jump from coal to renewables, frankly, you need proactive policies to promote the renewables. And to get from coal to efficiency, you need proactive policies to deliver end-use efficiency in millions of end-use locations. So carbon pricing, I view, as a very weak tool to do either of those things. My bottom line on carbon pricing is it's a useful mechanism to raise the money at moderate rates that are needed to do those other things. Okay. As a driver, it's not going to work.
Right. Yeah, I fully agree with you on that aspect. The tricky part, I think, is adding some income sensitivity so that when you have people lesser means confronting a higher price at the pump, it doesn't hurt them the way it would, like in rural Vermont, where I come from. It would be a major backlash.
Yeah, I certainly understand that, and that's why my energy justice question is on the list. That is, we're not solving this problem if we don't solve energy justice questions alongside of it.
Thank you.
You spent some time discussing the market barriers to making the changes that we all in this room agree need to be made. It feels like those barriers are deeply entrenched, and I wonder what private industry as well as government might be able to do from your perspective to help overcome some of those barriers.
Oh, I think there are two kinds of barriers that we're talking about. The end user barriers to end use efficiency. Lack of knowledge, the fact that they discount the future too much, they don't trust the contractors. There's all kinds of barriers at the end user level, just talking about efficiency. good program design has been shown to work to overcome those barriers. And private sector entities are and I think you mentioned your business earlier, are the ones that have to do the work. And so you guys, what we want to do is create basically the equivalent of an incentive performance system so that contractors and delivery agents and smart energy companies will work with customers and learn how to do such a good job that they're getting past those barriers. And the public goal is to design a strong program that allows you to do that. The second kind of barrier that one might be talking about is it goes like this. Like, what about the fact that if you're a fuel oil dealer, and that's where you make your money, basically selling gallons, what's in it for you? Either for when your customers get more efficient or when your customers decide to go with a heat pump. And here I think we need to have a two-part strategy. The one part of the strategy is to set a clear expectation about where we're going. That is, you can't run that coal plant forever. It's going to go. Make a plan for what your business is going to do. I was pleased the other day when my propane delivery guy came out to fix my tank, and I was just chatting him up about, I was moving from a big tank to a little tank because I got a heat pump. And, I said, well, what are you going to do? I'm not buying much propane anymore. And he said, that's okay. We're going to go into the heat pump business. And I was really, happy to hear that from somebody, and that's an example of a small business solution. But at a more fundamental level, there's a lot of carbon that's got to be left in the ground. And if your business model is you're going to make money either digging it or pumping it and selling it, then as a society, we have to say to you what I've called, thank you for your service. And I mean that in a positive way. It's like if we are realistic and honest, the society we live in today, go back to my slide about all the carbon emitted in my lifetime. We go back to that slide, we realize our civilization as we know it was built on fossil fuel. And yet, it has to change. I want to acknowledge, I want to praise the people who have done that work, and I want to help them find other things to do.
Hi, Chuck Fenton from Heartland, and I have a question along that same line, but not in the housing sector, but in the transportation sector. Down in White River, we have, I think it's 4 huge auto dealerships, either having been built or totally under construction right now. And about 80% of what they're building is for service of essentially fossil cars. And I've talked with some repair people who, like your propane guy, they're worried because if we switch to electric vehicles, it's basically going to put them out of business because the service requirements are so much less. So my question is, obviously people are making huge investments down there in building service facilities for fossil cars. How are we going to deal with that aspect of it? Because one would think they would not be in favor of moving towards EVs.
The only way to answer that question is to say that it's going to be the end users who buy the vehicles. And business will adjust. I don't want to be casual about it at all because the import of your question is significant. But when lots of businesses started giving personal desktop computers to employees, the entire secretarial pool was done away with. We have been through, when we got automatic switching equipment in the telephone industry, the operator pool no longer had jobs. Technological transformation in a free market economy happens all the time. And I'm not blasé about it at all. I would like transition assistance to exist for industries that are dramatically affected by public policies, but we also can't be held hostage to folks who want to keep doing it the way they've been doing it. I mean, there's a negotiation in Germany right now to phase out coal. Coal used to be more than 50% of electricity in Germany. The coal miners are important politically, socially, and as individuals. So a just transition for those coal miners has to be part of the package of phasing out coal in Germany, as it does in the US eventually. And it has to be part of the picture. That's really all I can say.
Last question.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate how at the beginning of your talk you mentioned how the carbon problem has to be attacked by all angles. And I'm wondering, nobody has yet mentioned our patterns of consumption. And I really want to try to work on ways that we can make it sexy to use less, so we don't have to buy as many cars or live in as big as homes or have so many electronic devices in our homes that draw power. So maybe incentivize fewer things in our homes, or how can we attack that problem of consumption?
I actually don't know the answer to this question. If you were to talk to my wife, she would tell you that, yes, my barn is filled with equipment that is long outlived its usefulness. And I keep it around because I think that, well, it's a Vermont tradition. It's not dead. It's not dead yet, so I'm going to keep using my 50-year-old piece of equipment. Our consumerist society is organized mostly differently than that. I really honestly don't know the answer to that, other than there's a push in Europe, actually, and I'll just give you something to look up. It's called sufficiency. It's the movement for sufficiency as opposed to just efficiency. Instead of just consuming the same amount of end-use services but doing it more efficiently, the idea is, well, do we really need all that in the first place? Now, you've heard some answers this morning already about basically, I used to be an urban planner. I totally get that urban design or townscape design, take your pick, can really help people to live a less consuming lifestyle. And we give inadequate, I can't deal with the contents of your closet, but but we can, as a public policy matter, deal with the zoning laws that would allow somewhat denser urban spaces with walkable cities. And those things are public policies. Thanks.
We'd like to give a round of applause and thank Rich for